safe anymore. The islands are calling. Climate change is real. Families are suffering, held against their will.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's webinar. On behalf of the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change, it is my great pleasure to warmly welcome you all to our webinar commemorating the one-year anniversary of the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion on climate change. We are delighted to have participants joining us from across the Pacific and around the world, including representatives from governments, civil society organizations, international organizations, youth movements, academia, legal practitioners, and our many partners and friends. And we thank you all for taking the time to be with us today as we reflect on this historic milestone and look ahead to the work that remains. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes, and also as people continue to trickle in before we start. This webinar is being recorded and may be shared on PISFCC's communication platforms. We request that you keep your microphones muted unless you are invited to speak. And we do encourage you to use the chat throughout the session to share your reflections, comments, and questions. We will have a dedicated Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let one of our organizers know through the chat and we will do our best to assist. Today is more than simply marking 1 year since the International Court of Justice delivered its landmark advisory opinion. It is an opportunity to celebrate what is possible when young people lead with courage, vision, and determination, and when governments, civil society, international organizations, indigenous communities, and legal experts work together towards a common goal. The journey to the world's highest court began with an idea from 27 Pacific law students who believed that international law could be a powerful tool for climate justice, and that vision evolved into a global movement supported by states, NGOs, INGOs, academics, communities, and thousands of advocates worldwide. Together, we demonstrated that meaningful youth engagement is not about being invited to the table. It is about helping shape the agenda, influencing international law, and drive lasting change. 1 year on, the advisory opinion continues to inspire legal action, strengthen climate advocacy, and reinforce the responsibilities of states to protect present and future generations. While we celebrate this remarkable achievement, today's discussion is equally focused on the road ahead, how we continue to implement the advisory opinion, strengthen accountability, and ensure it delivers meaningful outcomes for Pacific peoples and vulnerable communities around the world. We thank you again for joining us. We hope today's conversation inspires renewed commitment, deeper collaboration, and continued youth leadership in advancing climate justice. Our esteemed panel, who we'll hear from soon, consists of Her Excellency Ms. Veronica Brown, High Commissioner of Vanuatu to Fiji, Dr. Sivendra Michael, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Environment to Fiji, Halofipo So'alo Flo Ramsey, Indigenous and Human Rights Lawyer from Samoa, Dr. Sindra Sharma, International Policy Lead at the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, Mr. Shiva Gowden, Head of Pacific at Greenpeace Australia Pacific, Mr. Vishal Prasad, Director of the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change. Without further ado, it is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker and keynote speaker, Her Excellency Ms. Veronica Brown, who is an alumni of the University of the South Pacific and the Australian National University. High Commissioner Brown started in the private sector for 16 years, and she joined Foreign Affairs within the Oceania Division as a policy officer and later senior officer prior to being engaged as an executive officer, a total of 15 years at the ministry. Posted to Suva, Fiji as First Secretary, then later as Acting High Commissioner before assuming the role of High Commissioner in 2023. High Commissioner, the floor is yours. Oh, sorry, High Commissioner, if you could unmute your mic, please.
Vinaka, good morning, Olga, and warm greetings from the High Commission and the Republic of Vanuatu. I hope you can hear me. Thank you. Director Vishal Prasad from the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change and your team, distinguished panelists and participants listening in. I'm very honored and humbled to be able to be given the opportunity to address you all this morning. Particularly on the anniversary of 1 year after the ICJ AO has been delivered. I will try to, and please excuse me, I'll put this ahead because my camera and my audio might float in and out, and it might be, but I'm speaking from this side and you can hear me. Thank you very much. The journey, what has been meant for Vanuatu, for the Pacific, and for the whole world. The ICJ advisory opinion delivered what my minister, Honorable Ralph Regenvanu, has just described as a landmark milestone for climate change and course correction for this critically important time. The journey is much bigger than a legal case. The ICJ advisory opinion represents one of the most significant examples of Pacific leadership in international diplomacy in recent decades. It also demonstrates that even the smallest and the most vulnerable climate states like ours in the Pacific can shape international law when they combine principled leadership, strategic diplomacy, and broad partnership. The journey began not in government, as we know, but with our students, our youth from the USP MLS campus in Vanuatu, whose vision was embraced by the government of Vanuatu. We know this story well. It took almost 6 years for it to be tabled as a UNGA assembly in 2023. But it illustrates an important aspect of Pacific diplomacy. Governments, youth, civil society, academia, and international partners can work together around a common objective. It also signals some model Pacific diplomacy. As Vanuatu, a group of states, 16 in all, transformed the vision into a global diplomatic initiative by building regional consensus. It was very important, particularly at the time. The journey there did not just involve states, civil societies, our Pacific youth through the networks, but also securing the support of the Pacific Islands Forum, engaging other regional groupings such as CARICOM, the African groups, AOSIS, as well as engaging with others to mobilize and advocate through their networks, and ultimately achieving that consensus at the UNGA in 2023. And throughout the legal proceedings, Pacific countries continue to coordinate closely, sharing expertise, legal resources, and building evidence-based submissions. It's also a demonstration of Pacific solidarity, and we've heard that time and time and again. The advisory opinion process strengthened cooperation amongst our very own Pacific governments. Despite countries with different legal capacities, our partners and were able to bring together through the crop, and particularly with SPC's technical assistance through the ILC support for regional workshops to support our member countries and peer support. The process enabled our Pacific states to participate meaningfully before the world's highest court, despite our very limited resources. As a demonstration of agency, the process has showed that the international law is not only shaped by major powers. Countries like our small island developing states can successfully influence the development of international law when they speak with clarity, consistency, and unity. And the Pacific has demonstrated that moral authority, coupled with legal rigor and diplomatic persistence, can reshape global conversations across. The significance of the court's unanimous findings and the endorsement at the UNGA General Assembly, our Prime Minister, the Honorable Chodam Nambat, has stated that very clearly after the resolution was passed. And I quote, the adoption of this resolution does not conclude this journey. As we know, it begins a new chapter. The task before all of us now is to translate legal clarity into meaningful action stronger cooperation, and greater protection for present and future generations, end quote. So that task is before us now. We've seen the opinion and the resolution to operationalize the advisory opinion at UNGA with their overwhelming support from 141 countries and 90 co-sponsors that has shown that it has enjoyed, the AO has enjoyed a broad political legitimacy, but also the resolution signals rather that the vast majority of the states recognize that the opinion as an authoritative guide for future international cooperation. It also is leading from translating that aspiration to accountability. The ICJ opinion now changes the conversations from what states should do to what international law requires them to do. And I'm sure that during the ensuing panelist discussions, these points will be made much more clearly. The advisory opinion reinforces that climate change is not only a policy issue, it is framed by a comprehensive body of international law and confirms that connection between climate change, human rights, intergenerational equity, and the obligation of states to prevent environmental harm and cooperate internationally. Crucially, it does not create any new obligations. As we know, the Pacific Island countries have been at the forefront. It is also strengthening the legal and moral framework through which Pacific states have and continue to advocate for meaningful global action and strengthening regional and national action. So where to next? And we recognize that the resolution has been issued and that there is much of this work will be ultimately driven by member states, as well as we've talked about the cooperation and the opportunities that exist for member countries and for the development partnership, including our regional organizations, civil societies, to work and act together collectively. The advisory opinion is not the end. Rather, it is the successive initiative should not be measured by the opinion itself, but of this will truly depend on how effectively it is translated into diplomacy. The forthcoming Secretary General's report will provide an opportunity to identify practical pathways for implementing the court's guidance. And we've heard from our permanent representative at the United Nations, His Excellency Ambassador Odotevi spoke to the different ways that this can translate for the different UN agencies. But also, as specific countries, we continue to lead by ensuring that implementation reflects the needs and priorities of our climate vulnerable states. And that the report from the Secretary General should strengthen coherence amongst the UN system, but also support states in integrating the opinion into the decision making. There are opportunities for continued Pacific leadership. And I know that our esteemed panelists will speak to this after myself on the opportunities, for example, during the pre-COP and also the upcoming COP sessions. But for member countries like Vanuatu and across the Blue Pacific continent, member countries have not waited for the resolution. They have continued to advocate, they have continued to work and mobilize across, together with member governments, civil societies, and including our youth. And this calls for stronger collective action in various ways as a tool for strengthening Pacific leadership is also about accountability. And for member countries like Vanuatu, there are initiatives that the country has already commenced and continues to do so. including the revision of its NDCs, also in the reforms of its legislations, as well as on the work on fossil fuel proliferation treaty and the energy roadmaps, which it has continued to strengthen. A couple of weeks ago, one to his led a convening on climate innovation. And this has been seen recorded historic success from participation, but also on the innovation that has continued to be advocated by our communities at the front line. Climate innovation does not always mean high-tech inventions or artificial intelligence. In the Pacific, it can be as simple as communities adapting traditional knowledge to respond to the growing impacts of climate change. So as we step into the next phase now to what next, and it's the collective leadership that will continue to drive this, not just for the advocacy. And I had the privilege of attending one of the initiatives from the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change on the Yumi Rise Collective, which was an excellent example of our partners taking lead in growing leadership in this space. But there are also opportunities that are present for our countries in the Blue Pacific continent to lead. Esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the privilege to be able to address you on the historic occasion that we now celebrate. It has indeed been a celebration. It has indeed been a celebration of Pacific leadership, for Pacific collective engagement that can be inclusive and that has mobilized the global leadership to where we are today. I thank you very much. Thank you, Tomas.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for setting the scene so eloquently, for guiding us through a reflection of what the past 6 years has been and what it accomplished for the region, and also what the work ahead of us looks like. It is my honor to introduce the next speaker. Dr. Sivendra Michael works at the intersection of policy, leadership, and global environmental and climate governance, with a career grounded in advancing resilience, sustainability, and equitable decision-making for small island developing states. His professional experience spans international negotiations, public sector leadership, economic and policy analysis, and institutional reform. He has worked extensively across the Pacific and with global partners to translate complex global commitments into practical national and regional outcomes. He currently serves as Fiji's Permanent Secretary for Environment and Climate Change, leading national policy direction, international engagement, and contributions to global environmental and climate governance platforms. Dr. Michael's work is guided by principled leadership, evidence-based policy, and a strong commitment to inclusive, people-centered governance in the service of present and future generations. P.S. Michael, the floor is now yours. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, Lilieta, and Your Excellencies, respective panelists and audience listening in, and to the amazing team that led the ICJ to the highest court, those behind it, those that gather again to celebrate this 1 year anniversary. A very good morning to you from Canberra, where we are on the margins of finalizing the pre-COP agenda. And I am joining you as well at a very important time, given that this discussion on where the advisory opinion sits within the pre-COP and the COP framing is one that is very much important and needs to be addressed in a holistic manner. So again, allow me to congratulate all of the colleagues that have also worked so extensively hard to take this into the UNGA process and have a resolution passed by majority, which also demonstrates that your leadership spans from ends to end, and governments and your communities are there to support you through and through this process and even beyond. So for us, I just wanted to talk about what the IO means, the advisory opinion means for the Pacific going into COP31. First of all, the advisory opinion is the foundation the Pacific must stand on at COP31 as well as pre-COP. It should not sit alongside our negotiating priorities because it is the legal architecture underneath all of them. And so every position we take into pre-COP and COP31 should be traceable back to the ICJAO. For us as well, the advisory opinion actually converts climate action from a political goodwill into a binding legal obligation. The Pacific no longer negotiates on the basis of a moral appeal, vulnerability, or charity. We negotiate on the basis of the law. And this is a structural shift because when we bargain, we're not only bargaining in power, we are not just a we're not only bargaining just in rhetoric, we are bargaining in power, in law. And at a time when the science itself Dr. Sindra and others will tell you what happened at SBs, when it's continuously under political attack, the advisory opinion actually confirms that 1.5-degree temperature guardrail is the legal threshold. It is not an aspiration. And this is not a technical footnote. It is the world's highest court that has ruled that science, at a moment when the science is being questioned and undermined, they have already told us what the science has already told us. The convergence of law and science closes the door from backsliding towards the 2-degree temperature goal. Under customary international law, subsequent state practice matters. Every time we invoke 1.5 degrees as an operative standard in every statement, in every submission, and in every negotiation room, we are building the state practice that keeps it locked in a settled law under the Paris Agreement. Silence is not neutral here. It cedes ground to those that are trying to reopen this number. The AO, the advisory opinion, also converts NDCs from political pledges into instruments of legal accountability. And that's very important because our nationally determined contributions must now be judged against 3 tests. One, the alignment with the 1.5-degree temperature goal. Second, the reflection of each state's responsibility and capacity, the principles of CBDRRC. And third, the demonstrated progress over time. So as NDCs, we know that some countries have still not submitted their NDCs. This advisory opinion actually ensures that this is a legal accountability of states to submit and make sure that they follow through their NDCs. An NDC that fails this test is not just weak ambition, it is a state failing short of an international legal obligation. The advisory opinion also establishes a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right, which opens a direct legal pathway from human rights law into loss and damage as an entitlement, not a donation. This reframes finance conversations, loss and damage, as not aid we are asking for, it is the remedy that we are owed. And the advisory opinion also affirms that the Pacific statehood and maritime boundaries endure despite deep sea level rise. This is not a side issue. It is a very important one for us to remember in all of the spaces we engage in. It secures our sovereignty, our EEZ, and our resource rights for the longer term. Independent of what happens to our physical coastlines, this is arguably the single most consequential line in the advisory opinion for our region's future security. In terms of how we can leverage the advisory opinion in negotiations, I have 3 key points. First, we can use the advisory opinion as an anchor in the negotiation rooms. Every time a party proposes weak language, we have a reference point that raises the legal cost of that weakness. It is no longer just ambition we would like to see. It must be measurable against a legal standard. Second, we can deploy it to reframe finance and fossil fuels. Continued fossil fuel subsidies and expansions can now be characterized in legal terms as a conduct of inconsistency or inconsistent with the state's obligations under international law. So it is not merely as a policy choice we can disagree with. It is basically calling out countries that your state obligations under international law asks you to act in a very consistent manner with the advisory opinion. And that basically reframes the finance conversation from generosity to remedy, as I have spoken before. Lastly, it closes the loophole on Paris Agreement membership. The advisory opinion confirms the obligation to protect the climate system that arises under the general international law and does not depend on Paris Agreement membership. There is no exit ramp. So those that are choosing to, exit, I just recently heard New Zealand also saying that if one of the party wins, they will be choosing to exit. So this is a thank you for your comments, but there is no exit ramp, right? So a state that cannot negotiate its way out of its legal obligation by weakening a COP tax, right? So our message should be to stop treating tax negotiations as the only battlefield and instead press the smarter and more viable path that for any state to move from ambition to implementation, not only to hunt for language, let them it's not only they're hunting for language, they're also trying to evade their responsibility. Lastly, I wanted to come back, and I know that other panelists will be touching on this, which is on defending the science, which is pretty much a very big challenge right now. So the advisory opinion enshrines the IPCC report as the best available science with the legal standing. So there is no longer just a scientific reference point. It is now part of a legal foundation itself. So defending the IPCC in my view, is defending the law. And so there is also the coordinated push. It was visible at SB64 and prior meetings to strip IPCC and the 1.5-degree references and also delay the next assessment cycle. I know we have our IPCC authors on the call. They will talk about this. But from my view, this is not a technical drafting dispute, right? It is a deliberate attempt to hollow out the evidentiary basis the World Court has relied on, and it is recognizing it for what it is. And lastly, it is about rallying the region behind one clear message. An attack on the IPCC is an attack on the foundation the World Court has declared binding. Misinformation and the deliberate degradation of good information has never served the world's collective interest in any domain at any time, and least of all on the issue that depends on a coordinated global action. The IPCC was actually established more than 3 decades ago precisely to prevent this. It is rigorous, it draws on the world's leading scientists, it is peer-reviewed, and it represents as close to settled fact as the world will get on this issue. Now, I know that states and stakeholders attacking the IPCC or pushing the text to delay the next assessment. I want to let them know through this webinar that they are not acting in the Pacific's interest, and the region will not treat that behavior as a signal or as a footnote, right? We will do what we have to do with the advisory opinion as our legal reference point. And lastly, I would like to say the world's highest court has spoken. It has confirmed what the Pacific has said for 30 years, that 1.5-degree goal is not a target we are asking for. It is a threshold the law now protects. That our people's statehood does not dissolve with the tide, that science we rely on is not up for negotiation. The question before the COPs and the pre-COPs is no longer whether this obligation exists. They do. They are settled and they are binding. The only question is whether parties in the rooms choose to meet them. Fiji and the Pacific will not accept another decade of that question being deferred. And as I said it before in another press conference, those that choose to question the science, those that continue to push the science and challenge the science, they are not the friends of the Pacific. And definitely they are not friends of Fiji. Thank you.
I thank you, Dr. Sivendra Michael, for your powerful intervention and for grounding this discussion in the technical purposes that the advisory opinion can be used for, and also as a snapshot of what the region is looking to do as we mobilize for COP31 and pre-COP. Before I move to the next speaker, I'd like to invite attendees to put any questions you may have in the Q&A function. Please direct them to the speaker you would like the question responded to, and also feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I notice no one has said anything in the chat. If you would like to introduce yourself, where you are joining from, please do so. It is now my honor to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Sindra Sharma. She is the International Policy Lead at the Pacific Island Climate Action Network, and she holds a PhD in Environmental Policy and Development from the London School of Economics and Political Science, with an academic background in cognitive neuropsychology. Sindra has worked extensively across multilateral environmental treaty processes, serving Pacific small island developing states as an advisor, negotiator, and civil society representative. She also serves as a coordinating lead author for the Small Islands chapter of Working Group 2 in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, 7th Assessment Report, AR7. We are very happy to have you join us this morning, Dr. Sindra, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Lilietta. And it's always really humbling to be invited to this celebration and any convening by the students. And really grateful that you've given me this opportunity to celebrate alongside you and with our fellow panelists. So good morning, beloved Naka, everyone. It's really an incredible joy to be here with you today on this really important occasion where we can remind ourselves of the journey that brought us to this place we're at right now. So 6 years ago, this was a classroom in Vanuatu. That's incredible to think about, with law students at USP, not a delegation, not a mandate, just young Pacific people who decided the law didn't yet reflect the truth of what was happening to us. So they'd make it. And the way they have paved for us will go down in generations to come as a profound act of courage, of care, and of justice. And the trust that then Pacific states put in you and carried this forward is really a model of governance for the world. 1 year ago, the world's highest court agreed unanimously. And 1 year after that landmark victory, the climate policy world is characterized by a stark divide between unprecedented legal clarity and now severe political obstruction. And the reason I'm talking about this is to show the strength, actually, of what was achieved by you. This is expected when you are actively changing systems, when you are world making. And as Her Excellency so well articulated, our journey continues to accountability and implementation. This is what the Pacific has done and continues to do. While the ruling fundamentally strengthened the legal tools available to vulnerable states, translating these findings into actionable policy is a journey and has proven difficult for a reason, because shifting systems is always going to be met with good and bad resistance, including that on science, which you heard of, but this is not a space we will falter on. And as we have shown time and time again, the Pacific stands strong, and now you've given us the tools to be able to do that much more effectively. So legally, the ICJO delivered massive victories for climate action, and the court unanimously rejected the argument that the Paris Agreement displays broader international law obligations and officially fixed that 1.5 target, our survival limit. So this and all the other crucial elements in the AO have been an urgent signal to a broad group of stakeholders to our understanding of justice if we exceed this target. In the period before and during the AO, we've seen a wealth of literature, of action around this concept that was started, right? And then in how we can now implement it. Together with the 2024 and 25 advisory opinions from ITLOS and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, this has really established a coherent and mutually reinforcing body of international climate jurisprudence. But despite these legal breakthroughs, we know that the AO has faced intense obstruction within the UNFCCC And again, this is not a negative. It shows world making in action. At COP30 in Belém, we saw that oil producing states really were trying to block any mention of it. And at the subsequent SB64 meetings in Bonn, the AO was invoked, and again, you saw the pushback from certain parties. But from the inside, it's a very different story. And this is a story that Dr. Michael has already laid out. The AO is now an overlay in the way the line is being held on science, on ambition, and our understanding of 1.5. And it has imbued strength through every single agenda item. So when the Pacific shows up, when small islands, least developed countries, and all of our allies and ambition show up, they show up with a different kind of strength behind them now. And we can argue that this reflects a new primary fault line in global climate diplomacy as well, where we see the geopolitical divide is no longer as strictly developed versus developing nations, but rather petrostates versus electrostates, again, something that Her Excellency alluded to. But this has been the case for a long time as well. And nations whose economic models depend on fossil fuels are increasingly using the space of the UNFCCC to block the kind of progress that we want to see, which demonstrates a sort of structural limit of such a fora in mediating distributional conflicts. But because the UNFCCC was unable to deliver a phase-out framework at the post-AO COP, what the AO did was enable diplomatic efforts to operationalize a ruling, moving into parallel tracks. So, for example, we saw this in Santa Marta this year with the Transition Away from Fossil Fuels conference, which was explicitly framed as a two-tier multilateralism coalition designed to implement the ICJ's finding that fossil fuel expansion constitutes a wrongful act. And the most consistent finding across 1 year on is that the legal clarity provided by the ICJ has consistently outpaced the procedural readiness to enforce it. And we see the building blocks now being laid. For instance, in May, with the UN General Assembly resolution being passed, we saw what the bloc of opposing and abstating states tried to do. And this gives us direction, right, in terms of where the next blocks of accountability need to set. Whether in UNFCCC finance negotiations, COP texts, or domestic litigation, advocates are building together for litigation templates, attribution science partnerships, and more stringent NDC benchmarking tools, which require to turn the court's theoretical reparations and due diligence frameworks into actual compensation and policy outcomes. So the immense strength that this has given us a year on is really evident in all of the spaces that we operate on. And I think I will leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sindra, for your wonderful remarks to remind us of what the advisory opinion has accomplished and can continue to. Our next speaker is Alofipo So'oalo Fleur Ramsey, a Samoan human and indigenous rights lawyer working at the intersection of climate and environmental law, justice and custom, or the indigenous law in the Pacific region and at an international level. She has been part of the legal team supporting the region in the historic ICJ climate proceedings, and she was awarded the Winston Churchill Fellowship to undertake travel and research, innovative lawyering, and best practice indigenous environmental law practice. Fleur has an excellent pedigree in law, having worked as a solicitor at one of the top law firms in Australia and as a barrister at a prestigious chambers in Sydney, and as an associate to a judge at the Federal Court of Australia. She has been bestowed the chiefly orator titles of Alofipo from the Sale Aula village and So'oalo from Samaunga village, both on the island of Savaii in Samoa. Alofipo, thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you. So the ICJ advisory opinion is the most important judicial pronouncement to date on climate change, and that's still the case 1 year on. As the High Commissioner of Vanuatu to Fiji said, it was an important course correction, particularly for the Pacific. And two of those important course corrections was that states have various obligations under international law to protect the climate system from significant harm. The other important course correction is that states can be held responsible for breaches of those obligations. The influence of the ICJ AO on climate litigation is still being shaped. My concern for the ICJ advisory opinion is that it be used in a way which does not undermine this course correction. I'm going to have a look at two cases in particular and the relevance of the ICJ to those cases. The first is Greenpeace Netherlands and the state of Netherlands, which is otherwise known as the Bonaire case. This was a domestic case in the Netherlands, and it's an extremely important case. Bonaire is in the Caribbean, and it is a territory of the Netherlands. The case was brought on behalf of the population on human rights grounds. It is a low-lying state, and like Pacific low-lying states, there are disproportionate impacts of climate change on the population. The court found that the mitigation and adaptation measures were in breach of the Netherlands' human rights obligations under the European Convention. In particular, the Netherlands had breached the right to private and family life because the state did not meet its obligations assumed in the UN context, and this is its mitigation obligations. Most importantly, the state was in breach of equality or non-discrimination provisions, particularly in relation to adaptation. And it was not based on an idea of formal equality, but a recognition of two things. One, that Bonaire suffers disproportionate harms, and not the same as European Netherlands. The second is the lack of adequate action against those disproportionate harms. So the breach was in relation to an omission, and the omission, i.e. the failure to do something, was due to the fact that the Netherlands knew that Bonaire was suffering disproportionate impacts and failed to do anything about it. And that was the discrimination aspect or the equity aspect. There was another really important equity point. And the court adopted effectively a common but differentiated responsibilities and respected capacity approach. The Netherlands did not meet the minimal requirement for the state's equitable, and it uses this term, equitable contribution to the measures that must be taken to keep warming within 1.5 degrees. And the important aspect of this is that the Netherlands had not taken into account its historic contributions and whether its carbon budget was already exceeded or how much it had left in the carbon budget based on those historic emissions. And this is a very important point, and it comes from the ICJ. The second case is a communication to the Human Rights Committee, and it hasn't been decided by the Human Rights Committee, but it's also very important. It is brought by Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, and it takes on Australia's fossil fuel exports, which are extremely large. Australia is, in the top 3 in terms of fossil fuel exports, and there's no sense that it's winding down. So those human rights grounds were in relation to the right to life, privacy, family, and home life, and the right to culture. And it's grounded in harms that have already occurred. So fires, then a massive algae bloom in South Australia, which killed billions of sea creatures, floods and heat impacts. So it's grounded in that. There are some issues, though, which I do want to raise, which will not affect Australia's violation of these human rights, but it is in relation to this course correction issue. So one of the claims that is made is that Australia must be in alignment with 1.5 degrees. And there's a couple of problems with this. One is that it's framed as a permissible, so 1.5 is a permissible amount of warming that's allowed. Obviously, that's what the Paris Agreement says, but it doesn't take into account Australia's common but differentiated responsibilities, and whether Australia, given its historic contributions, is already in breach of its obligations, and whether it even has any carbon budget left. It also, I think, conflates the concept of harm and the concept of mitigation in the Paris Agreement. So we already have a concept of harm, which is working under the customary requirement to take in to protect the climate system or to prevent significant harm to the climate system. We've already breached significant harm, which is the ICJ made clear. And the ICJ also used scientific findings, which were very clear in terms of climate change is dangerous. There's not much time left. There's all these irreversible harms that have already occurred. So my concern is that harm and requirements under Paris Agreement, so liability and requirements to stop warming at a certain threshold are not conflated. The other important aspect is in relation to the 1.5 that they put is at a 50% possibility of reaching 1.5. If we take into account and we take the idea of stringent due diligence and stringent action seriously, the precautionary principle, as well as human rights, then I think 50% falls well short of what is required by governments. And in relation to Indigenous peoples, again, a binary approach could be taken in relation to the equitable and discrimination aspects and states' requirement in relation to substantive equality to take even stronger actions when you have a population that is more vulnerable than the rest of the population. I think that these are issues that need to be contended with so that the ICJ AO isn't undermined. And I think it's really important that we continue to take the most progressive interpretation of the ICJ in all of the climate litigation that we undertake. And that you can see, I think, two slightly different approaches in the way that Bonaire case was taken. It's still not perfect, but it's an interesting approach in relation to this equity issue as opposed to this human rights complaint, which, again, I'm not saying this to say that Australia hasn't violated these human rights, but just an important aspect of framings and the course correction that the Pacific took, and important to the Pacific because if you're saying that 1.5 doesn't reach the kind of threshold for for harm, a lot of our populations in the Pacific have been suffering for decades at much lower temperatures. So we have to really take these issues into account.
Thank you very much, Alofiko. We will diverge from the planned program. Given Dr. Suvendra Michael has to leave within the next couple of minutes, we wanted to pose a question to you, if that's okay, P.S. Michael. The question is, the Pacific has defined four Pacific priorities, 3 envoys, and a number of champions to advance these priorities in negotiations at Antalya. What are the hopes of Fiji and the PCIDs going into pre-COP and COP with the unique partnership that COP31 presents for the region on getting for our people a promising text and outcome? If you could speak to this, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, moderator, for that question. So, like I said, we are at the back of finalizing the agenda. The Australia-Pacific Partnership has identified 4 pillars. One is on 1.5 degree, and keeping the science alive. And the second one is on the climate finance issue, and the third one is really on the ocean climate nexus. Of all of these three, we know that two of these three agenda items are already official negotiation items, whereas the ocean is not. So I'll start with the ocean. What we are trying to do with the presidency team is knowing that for the dialogue to be elevated from the subsidiary body level into the COP level, we would need the presidency to think about possible options such as a cover decision or something of this nature. So the pre-COP will actually set the ground for having this discussion, so that we can actually see and hear from membership on how we can progress this into the presidential initiative, or as a pathway to get it fully recognized. With the climate finance, I think it's an opportunity for the 70 plus countries that will be invited to pre-COP to have an experience of how the distinct realities of how finance flows is already such a big problem, but also how the communities are not able to fully access this funding because of the intermediary functions, the lack of accredited entities, and so forth. So there are a couple of things that we are trying to do with the presidency. Is one, through the action agenda, and second is to ensure that the climate finance negotiation items are ones that can be pre-discussed, because currently we have no confirmation on the agenda where the climate finance work program is going to be included or not. We still don't have that confirmation. So it's also to bridge that political divide on why it must be in the agenda and why we need to discuss this. And for the 1.5, I think we will have multiple discussions as well as side events to elevate the realities of the Pacific. It is a Pacific COP. We hope that these frontline truths and narratives are able to change also the perspective of many of those countries that have never set foot or do not even know the existence of the real problems and challenges that we are facing. So we are ensuring that those countries that the parties that consistently challenge the 1.5 have an opportunity to visit our shows, and also to value, to really understand what it means in the context of what we are negotiating. Within this process as well, I think the Turkey presidency, I must admit, has been very forthcoming with the action agenda and trying to ensure that the Pacific has a space in terms of the teams that will be set up to support them, but also there is some conversation around the initiatives that they have, and they're waiting for Pacific to crystallize their ideas so that we can also appraise them without losing the Pacific essence. So there can be a global initiative, but then under the global initiative, there can be a parallel Pacific initiative as well. So these are things that we are working through over the last few months, and will continue working until August, September. But I believe that even the leaders meeting in Palau will be a pivotal point to try and shape some of the conversations that we would like to have, even in the margins of Tuvalu or in the margins of the meetings in Tenerife. My last point is everyone on the call and all the team, particularly our Pacific Island students fighting climate change, you are invited to the submit a side event. You can have multiple side events, single side event, up to you, however you want to do it. The expression of interest should come out either tomorrow or early next week, and it will be through our website, so you can submit your expression of interest. We will also assess where this is placed, close to a plenary meeting where we are discussing 1.5. At the end of that, we go right into this kind of workshop setting or stakeholder engagement, or whether we place it in a larger plenary setting within a broader stakeholder base. So these are conversations, and your concept note will actually tell us what are the audience that you are gauging, what are the numbers, so that we can allocate those rooms. Rest assured, the Fiji government and the Australian government are covering the cost of the venue. You just have to ensure that if there is catering involved, then you must have to arrange that accordingly with the hotel directly. But you do have your sounding board. If there is anything, you can reach out to me. Vishal can put my email address on the chat. Please do drop me an email address. I'm very responsive on email, so I will be able to get back to you on any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Savendra, for answering those questions and also providing details and information for those interested in hosting site events. Our team will find your email address and pop it into the chat. And we also understand that you have a busy day ahead of you. So we thank you for taking time to join us for this webinar, and we wish you all the best with the rest of the mission in Canberra. So thank you so much, Dr. Savendra. I'm now happy to introduce the next speaker, Mr. Shiva Gowden, who leads the Pacific Campaign at Greenpeace Australia Pacific. He is an accomplished advocate for environmental sustainability and climate justice, with a focus on empowering communities in the Pacific region. With extensive experience in campaign strategy and community engagement, Shiva has worked with various organizations to promote initiatives that address climate change and protect natural resources. Known for his collaborative approach, he emphasizes the importance of inclusive decision-making and the principles of accountability and transparency in environmental policy. Shiva is dedicated to raising awareness about the impact of fossil fuels and advocating for sustainable solutions that benefit both the people and the Pacific Islands. Thank you so much, Shiva. The floor is now yours.
Vinaka Lili, nisambola vinaka and namaskaram. Au vinaka tame vakaru korokataki irana nongo ngase kena nongo vanua. Vinaka vakalevu in huge gratitude with humility, especially joining the wonderful panelists to celebrate this moment, and also for the kind introduction, which I probably don't deserve. But let's trace the currents back to where this all began. It didn't start in a parliament sitting or a UNGA room. It ended up in all of these places. But really, the spark was lit in the spirit of a handful of Pacific youth and universities. Monumental initiatives of justice usually starts with one person and becomes a movement. In this case, in the true Pacific way, it started off as a small collective with limited resources, limited time, limited reach, but an unlimited, never-ending connection to the spirit of our Vanua and Moana. And a clear reason that it was for our people. It began the way all enduring things in our cultures begin, in a circle, a collective of students sharing ideas, making decisions not as individuals but as a community. The dream was bold to bring the voices of those who are the most impacted to not just the highest court in the world, but in the hearts and conscience and consciousness of millions across the world. You had lawyers, politicians, scientists, academics, indigenous people, students, educators, youth, women, and the list goes on. But a vision without a vessel goes nowhere. To cross this ocean, we truly had to build our waka, and our leaders in this journey were the Pacific Island students fighting climate change and the Vanuatu government. And they gave everyone the confidence, they gave everyone the space and the love to work together to forge a path forward. So we, when I say we, I mean everyone who joined this initiative, started on the ground. We trained our young people, we mobilized our communities across the islands, ensuring our roots were deep before we reached for the global stage. Once our collective heartbeat was unified, we took it to the Pacific Islands Forum and secured the crucial backing of our governments. By September 2023, we brought the Pacific to the shores of New York. We didn't just walk into the UNGA, we sailed right up to it. We had a flotilla action beneath the Statue of Liberty, which is seen as the symbol of justice in the Western world. We showed the world what climate justice looks like in motion. We held dialogues, breaking down complex legal jargon so the advisory opinion belonged to the people. Then we had to take it to the COP. And following that, many webinars, climate marches, quiet vigils, actions, documentaries. We invited the world to row with us, and they did. We secured the UN vote overwhelmingly, and we brought our VACA all the way to The Hague. But to get to The Hague, we needed the voices of our people again. And that's when testimony gathering became our focus. Every corner of the world wanted to share and to give their voice to this massive megaphone that was being crafted. This wasn't just a diplomatic strategy, it was a masterclass in cross-regional solidarity. It was all about unity, no egos, no individual agendas. It was about a collective. It proved that when a movement is anchored in unity, humility, and peace, and shared survival, no tide can turn it back. When we finally entered the International Court of Justice, we didn't walk in alone. If you looked around that room and outside those courts, we saw the true raw power of our coalition, our alliance, our community, our family. You saw the women who sustain our island food systems and carry our communities. You saw children and youth fiercely refusing to surrender their futures. You saw indigenous elders standing side by side with international lawyers. You saw scientists standing hand in hand with government leaders. Everyone who stood with the Pacific there didn't just present legal precedent, they presented the lived realities. This was new to the court system, and it was what was needed. Because of that radical inclusion, the paradigm shifted. Science, which has been loudly telling us for decades, but today the law has finally caught up. The ICJ breached that gap. The 1.5-degree threshold is no longer just a desperate plea from climate scientists, it is a legal imperative. The court simply affirmed what the frontline communities have been pushing in those halls, that the destruction of our climate is not just a natural tragedy, it is a profound and actionable injustice. The law and the science are finally standing on the same exact ground, and we need to not let it slip. Not let it be just another moment in history, it needs to be the moment. The recent landslide victory in the UNGA vote showed that political will can catch up also. Civil society, governments, scientists, academics, lawyers all need to use this advisory opinion in every arena that addresses climate injustice, every diplomacy room, in our communities, in our courts. This was the most ambitious thing to come out of any multilateral environment to address what is a multi-generational crisis. But we know deeply and intimately that a legal ruling alone does not hold back the sea. A piece of paper in The Hague will not rebuild communities after a Category 5 cyclone. This is where the true power of the people must take the helm. This is when we need the strongest political will. The opinion is our new map, but we are the ones who must navigate that ship. The next phase of the campaign requires organized, unrelenting, and strategic pressure, specifically when it comes to phase out of fossil fuels and the finance that is necessary for the transition as well as for historical harm. This advisory opinion strips away the veil of voluntary pledges. Expanding coal, oil, and gas operations is no longer just environmentally reckless, it defies international legal duties. So as we prepare for the pre-COP dialogues and cast our eyes towards COP31 in Turkey this November, our purpose cannot be more urgent. We can't keep saying this year after year. We need a strong and clear strategy to utilize the AO in these spaces, where it doesn't dilute the AO. We built this movement together, community by community, nation by nation. Now we must leverage this historic victory to finish the job, to protect our people, to protect our ocean and our shared home. Vinaka.
Thank you so much, Shiva, for that powerful and almost poetic recording of the ICJAO campaign. Thank you for your words. We now move to our last speaker for today's panel, Mr. Vishal Prasad, who perhaps needs no introduction and in fact insisted that I do not include a bio for him. The only way I can introduce him is as the current director for the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change. Vishal, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lily. Thanks, everyone, Your Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm Bulavinaka good morning to you all. And truly an amazing day to be speaking with you all today, but also maybe first to just take a moment to say that what makes it even more special is that I'm sharing the stage with some of the most integral people who have made the ICJ climate ruling possibility. And many of you might not know the whole panelist lineup that we have today, each of the panelists. And I must say, I was also looking at the attendee list before coming on, and a few of the folks, there are a handful of folks in the audience as well who have just been immensely integral to this campaign. And so each of the panelists here particularly have played a giant contribution in this victory. And I know they will not say this but I wanted to just take a moment and recognize all my fellow panelists who also really did contribute, put in their hands, and made the impossible possible. So a big thank you to you all. We've had all of the legal, the policy, and the political elements covered. And I maybe just wanted to start by taking us back to the ICJ. 1 year ago today, exactly to this date, I was at the ICJ, our team was at the Peace Palace in The Hague, and we listened as the world's highest court read out unanimously what our region had been campaigning for 6 long years. I remember the silence in our group when the president of the court reached the findings on 1.5 degrees, and just the disbelief where our mouths literally were open, remained open when the court spoke about fossil fuels and when the court spoke about reparations. And we kept turning to each other and just tapping each other as if we were checking to see if all of this was for real. And it was real because for the first time, the ICJ did speak to all of these elements. The highest court in the world spoke to all of this. And it was what our region had called for and really was a new dawn for climate justice. And in my remarks, I wanted to do two things. I want to first celebrate what this region has achieved, what our region has achieved, and also wanted to make a commitment about what comes next. And so the celebration aspect, this has been talked about, and I wanted to re-emphasize and reinforce this, that what our region did, we all have a reason to be extremely proud of. Consider what actually happened here. In 2019, in a classroom, 27 students decided the world's highest court should be asked what obligations states have. There was no budget, no office, no standing, no recognition, really. And Vanuatu took up that question. The Pacific Islands Forum, as you've heard, carried it. A coalition of states from every region joined it. In March 2023, the UN adopted that resolution by consensus. That meant every country, which is huge. The court heard the most widely participated proceedings in its history, with Pacific testimony at its heart. And on the 23rd of July last year, the ICJ answered. It delivered a unanimous opinion. And a few months ago, 141 states voted to endorse that answer, that response, and carry it forward. From a classroom to the bench of the World Court and then back to the floor of the General Assembly in 6 years. No region has done this before. The countries the world calls small moved international law further than many have done in a generation, and not with a lot of wealth, not with armies, not with immense diplomatic might, but with the moral authority that was matched to the moment, to the need that was on the ground. And so every Pacific person watching this webinar owns a share of that, and that is what our region did. The second part is the commitment, and to make this commitment, I wanted to return to where this began. In 2019, those 27 students made a commitment that was, on any sober assessment, plus it could be called unreasonable, to carry a question from the Pacific to the world's highest court in the world and not to stop until that question was answered. Everything you heard today flows from the fact that those group of students kept at it. And today, on behalf of PISFCC, I make a second commitment where we will commit to carrying the operationalization of this advisory opinion into negotiating rooms, into the General Assembly's compliance process that the resolution has articulated, into the record of testimony, and into the hands of the next generation. And for as long as that takes, we must continue doing that. The first commitment was to ask the ICJ that question. The second is to ensure that the answer we have received is honored. And let me be clear that this is why we must carry this, why we do not simply frame the opinion and hang it on the wall, because the ruling, as Shiva said, is not self-executing. It has force only where someone insists on it. And the opposition is organized. 8 states voted against the resolution in May, 28 abstained, and they are counting on time and on our fatigue, because the next 16 months will decide the trajectory. The pre-COP on our soil in October, COP31, the Secretary General's reporting process next year. And because the ones who obtain this ruling have a standing no one else has, that's why we need to keep pushing. When the people who won the historic ruling walk away from it, it does become an artifact. And when they stay with it, it becomes the law in motion. Interestingly, when we were developing our strategic plan for the next 5 years, we called it staying with the trouble. And that really was not a slogan. It was a way to kind of crystallize that commitment. And so when our leaders stand in the Pacifics in October, in the first year of this ruling's life, let none of them leave without being asked this question: what did you do with this answer that the ICJ gave us? And so to all the young people, wherever we may be in the Blue Pacific, the 27 students, the group of students who started this, were no older than you, no more certain than you might be currently. They committed to a question, though, and we have committed to the answer. What you inherit is not a victory to admire, but it is a commitment we have to keep. And so 1 year ago, the court told the world what it must do. We will stay there. We will stay with the trouble to ensure next that the world does listen to that ruling. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Vishal, for drawing us to the end of this first set of opening remarks, taking us from the policy and the technical discussions of what the AO means to what it means to us as people of the Blue Pacific. That brings us to the end of the first portion of the webinar. We'll now move into Q&A. Our team are sort of sifting through the questions that can be delivered and answered by our panelists. Some have already been answered in the Q&A chat box. But the first question that we can ask is directed to High Commissioner Varanria Brown, if that's... The question goes, High Commissioner Brown, you mentioned that the advisory opinion and the UNGA resolution welcoming isn't the end, which is how the region saw these as tools rather than the end. With the Pacific Islands Forum leaders meeting in Palau starting at the end of next month, how can the region come together to utilize the AO in having a collective voice from states to civil society going into COP and pre-COP?
Thank you very much, Lilietta. And I know that also to the other panelists who have spoken before or after me. That's an important question. And we heard that mentioned by Shiva and also from Vishal about that it not being left alone. And I know that other countries have, like I mentioned before, they have already continued the work. But there was earlier on, what do we do next? So as a region, and we saw the success of the regional collective for the ICJ going forward and the UNGA resolutions. So there is the commitment for regional collective action, and we have earlier in May, there was a Climate Justice Week that was hosted by Vanuatu and the Pacific Islands Forum with other partners, also in trying to look at ways and opportunities on how to operationalize the ICJ opinion and the resolution as alluded to by Vishal. One of these was looking at the different environment, for example, on the environmental rights and the gaps that exist there. And that is perhaps another opportunity to pursue. We need to look at where we can strengthen those frameworks, but where we can together as a collective approach this going forward, noting that there's different capacities and also the differences in where our member countries within the Pacific region. We heard Dr. Tavendra has already spoken to the different pillars that they're pushing for under pre-COP. But also there is an opportunity for that to be influenced come the Pacific Leaders Forum in Palau. And I think that would call for what Vishal has said. It does not become something that is celebrated and sits there, but it builds on the momentum of what we have now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner, for answering that question. The next one that we've gotten from the chat is where is the conversation? Where is the conversation around diverting all military funding into climate adaptation and mitigation for the region to actually achieve an ocean of peace? How do we reclaim the terminology around security and defense in the region from militarized thinking and redirect it to the natural hazards and tell the rest of the world there's no space in the Pacific for anthropogenic sources of conflict? This would be open to all in the panel, but perhaps I think Shiva or Sindra or Fleur, other people, sorry, could speak to this. Thank you.
Sindra, would you like to take the floor?
Thank you, Shiva. This is a really good question. I was looking at it in the chat and trying to see how to do it justice with an answer. And I think it's not a clear sort of answer we can give, but it it follows the example of the students as well, right? I think it's taking the courage to speak out because there is clearly a difference in understanding of what oceans of peace means for different people, and I think there's a distinction in how we understand it. And then when it comes to like the securitization of the Pacific, this is a really broad conversation that leans onto how we see the nexus of climate and security in the Pacific through our regional architecture and what that means again, like the the sort of diversity of views of what that means. But generally, this can be boiled down, especially when we lean into what the AO has given us. So the in terms of then military emissions and spending, one of the places that really can be lent into is what PS Michael already spoke about, which is within the science policy space. Because within the multilateral fora, we don't have the tools to be able to speak to that right now. But what we do have is tools within these science policy spaces to reveal what the scenarios are in terms of emissions and spending on military versus on climate finance, etc. And then we lean onto that and build up and up and up to a better future.
Thank you, Sindra, for that answer. Our next question, unless no one else wants to add to that, just checking with the panel.
I might just quickly add, look, the Pacific has, if you look at the Pacific region, there's still a lot of scars left in the region in terms of the militarization, but also the legacies of nuclear, etc. And we, as people, need to speak out strongly. The Pacific takes a very, very respectful approach when we approach our leaders in terms of highlighting these things, and the Pacific Island students and the ICJ initiative just shows that. But if we stand for our people and if we stand for the justice elements of what's necessary for our region, then highly securitization of our region is not the way to go. And that doesn't bring Ocean of Peace. Ocean of Peace should be built on the principles of what Pacific people stand for, and that is love for our land, love for our ocean, and militarization is the complete opposite of it. So I would just advise people on this call, if you're in the region, please do reach out to your governments and ensure that the Ocean of Peace is truly Ocean of Peace rather than a securitization of our region.
Thank you so much, Shiva. So considering the time that we're at, we're going to take two more questions before we close the program. The next one, second last one, is directed to Vishal. The question is, how was moral authority used in the formation of the AO? And how would this moral authority flow through to COP and pre-COP? Thank you, Vishal.
Thanks for that question, Lily, and Kate for that question. A very important element of the whole ICJ campaign, I think, and Shiva alluded to this, has been the people and the testimonies of people and the realities of people, I think. And the moral authority for this whole case, for this whole campaign and this whole journey came from our people and came from our region. And I think the success of that was allowed this campaign to succeed. And if we're able to keep that as the model for how we show up in other spaces, be they COP or other non-climate multilateral spaces, etc., I think we will be carrying that moral authority very effectively, because the ICJ campaign did display this, that when we speak as people, when we speak as a region united in solidarity, and we take the lived realities and testimonies of people, we are actually taking that moral authority and standing on very solid ground. And so that was what was depicted throughout the ICJ campaign. And I think if we're able to replicate that into spaces, other spaces of power, we will be standing on very solid ground in echoing our demands.
Thank you, Vishal. And you spoke on the importance and how essential the testimonies collected during the campaign were. Alo Fipo, I wonder, because we haven't had an opportunity to hear from you. Your bio did mention that you led some of the work around collection of testimonies. Wondering if you would like to speak a little bit to that as it took place in the campaign, and perhaps how we can ensure, looking forward to COP and pre-COP, how we can ensure those lessons that we learned can show up in those spaces in real and tangible ways. Thank you.
Yeah, I think gathering testimonies from affected communities in Papua New Guinea, I travelled to New Caledonia, Kanaki New Caledonia, and Vanuatu was absolutely important. Important from the perspective that it showed that very devastating harm is already being experienced across communities in the Pacific. And we went to communities based on pre-existing relationships. And of course, as soon as we went there, not even knowing what the climate change impacts were, of course there were climate change impacts. Some from sea level rise, very extreme sea level rise, others in terms of not being able to grow crops, and the implications of that. And I think the importance of the way that it was done was to show that if you lose something like the ability to grow yam in some places, it just has a massive flow-on effect, not just in relation to people's ability to eat and nutrition, but in relation to chiefly status, in relation to people's identities, their stories, relationships with others, that in the Pacific, if you remove and something in a culture or it's affected, it has greater impacts, not just in terms of, again, food, but culturally. And I think it was important to put before the ICJ an understanding of how important our worlds are, and that climate change for us is world destroying, that it has such massive impacts on communities. It was also important to bring those voices to the court, because if you read the IPCC reports, then you'll see that a lot of the language is mute, even though we're in an emergency. To be able to kind of understand what the Pacific is experiencing and put it up against the science, I think actually put flesh on that science in a way for the ICJ, which I think wouldn't have had the same effect without that kind of testimony. In relation to future action, I think it's really important that we continue to document the harms, which I know the Pacific Island students fighting climate change have this kind of program of work. It's absolutely essential that that's continued to be done, and that those voices are brought into any negotiating fora, that it's taken to human rights mechanisms, and that they form the basis of cases. I think it's important that the Pacific continue to lead in this respect, because of some of the things that I was trying to talk about in my short statement, about the really important equity and climate justice issues, which says that the way that it impacts us is quite different, and that the way that international law develops has to take into account these differences, equities, and justice issues.
Thank you, Alafupo. Before we move to the last question, okay, we have been advised to move to the last portion of this webinar. We sincerely apologize if we didn't have time to answer questions, but we are open to further discussion after this webinar draws to a close. Now, thank you to all our esteemed panelists. Thank you for the questions. The last portion, we'd like to take a moment to share a glimpse into one of PISFCC's newest initiatives. The Witness Stand is a storytelling project that centers the lived experiences of Pacific people on the front line of the climate crisis. Through powerful personal narratives, it reminds us that behind every legal opinion, policy decision, and international negotiation are real people, real communities, and real stories of resilience, loss, hope, and determination. To introduce this project and its trailer, it's my pleasure to invite Sahil, PISFCC's Programs Officer, who has been instrumental in bringing this initiative to life. He'll share a few words about the vision behind the Witness Stand before we screen the trailer. Sahil, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, our civil society partners, friends, and allies, warm Pacific greetings to you all. It's a special moment for us as we gather to mark 1 year since the International Court of Justice delivered its landmark advisory opinion on climate change. 1 year ago, the ICJ's advisory opinion provided important legal clarity on responsibilities of states in addressing climate change. But beyond the legal significance of this milestone, it also reflected something deeply human: the voices and lived experiences of communities who have been calling for climate justice for decades. Those voices have always been the heart of the Witness Stand project. During the ICJ Advisory Opinion campaign, the Witness Stand became a platform for people to share their stories of living on the front line of the climate crisis and addressing the judges of the ICJ to hear their call. Together, we collected more than 100 stories from across the Pacific and around the world. These stories reminded us that climate change is not just discussed in courtrooms or conference halls. It is experienced every day in our homes, our villages, and our islands. These testimonies were part of the case presented before the ICJ. For the first time, the lived experiences of climate-affected communities stood firmly in front of the world's highest court. Today, we are proud to launch Phase 2 of the Witness Stand project, where Phase 1 was focused on gathering testimonies for a single moment before the court. Phase 2 is built for the long term. It is designed to continually collect, amplify, and preserve the voices of climate-affected communities, not just for one case, but as an ongoing living record that outlines the harm communities face and the need for justice. This then becomes a strong reference point to hold governments, institutions accountable for years to come. This next chapter builds on the journey through two key outcomes. First, a repository that preserves these powerful testimonies for future generations in form of accounts of harm. Secondly, the Witness Stand visual stories, a series of advocacy videos that ensures these voices continue to reach, especially the decision makers and audiences around the world. In the Pacific, we believe that stories are more than memories. They're part of who we are. They carry the wisdom of those who came before us, the realities of today, and the responsibility we have to those who will come after us. So today, as we honor 1 year, the ICJ of the ICJ advisory opinion, we invite you not just to watch, but to be a witness. So please join us as we present the official trailer to launch phase 2 of the witness stand. Thank you.
My name is Winnie Patti.
My name is Tora Willie.
My name is Edmund Saksak.
My name is Hagit Tongatuli.
My name is Jamal Talangi Vendriaki.
My name is Tali Totonu Tohovaka.
My name is Manasofai Uliamu Talangi.
With every cyclone, with every king tides, with the disappearance of the waters, I knew as a girl. I asked myself what this will mean for my grandson, for the future generations of the Pacific.
The next gust of wind, we saw the coconuts bend down so far and it stayed bent, leaves touching the ground, and suddenly everything turned white.
The place where we once stood is now underwater. No announcement, no warning, just the quiet reality that something we once knew no longer exists.
Along the coastline of Alofu South, especially when the tide is extremely low, you could walk along the reef of Aliutu, cleaning as you go. Unfortunately, today you would be lucky to have a day or two where the sea would be very low.
Even the resting place of our ancestors are not safe. The sea has washed away graves along the shore. The remains of our loved ones and the things buried with them have been taken by the ocean.
The transmission of knowledge over generations has stopped. It is not just about my children not being able to do what I did. It's the knowledge that comes with these practices being lost.
To me, the ocean and the land are fundamental parts of Niuean culture. They are our identity. They are our life.
And this is my story.
And this is my story.
This is my story.
This is my story.
And this is my story.
This is my story.
And this is my story.
Thank you so much, Sahil, for showing us the trailer of the witness stand. We also thank you for joining us as this is the launch of the next phase. And as Sahil mentioned, we invite you not just to be listeners, but as witnesses. With that, the webinar now draws to a close. I'd like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to everyone who has joined us in commemorating the 1-year anniversary of the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion on climate change. To our distinguished panelists, we thank you so much for generously sharing your expertise, insights, and reflections. Your perspectives have reminded us that the advisory opinion is not simply a historic legal achievement, but a living instrument that continues to shape climate action, strengthen accountability, and inspire hope across the world. To our participants joining us from the Pacific and beyond, we thank you for taking time to be part of this important conversation, and your continued engagement, commitment, and support are what keeps this movement growing. I'd like to also express our sincere appreciation to our partners, governments, civil society organizations, international organizations, and all those who have stood alongside Pacific youth throughout this remarkable journey. The success of the advisory opinion demonstrates what is possible when young people, governments, and diverse stakeholders work together with a shared vision and purpose. And finally, a thank you to the PSOCC team working behind the scenes for organizing today's events and coordinating speakers to managing the technical aspects of the webinar. As we celebrate this milestone, let us remember that anniversaries are not only moments to reflect on how far we have come, but also moments to renew our commitment to the road ahead. The work of implementing the advisory opinion, advancing climate justice, and ensuring meaningful youth leadership continues. We thank you all for celebrating this important milestone with us, and we look forward to continuing the journey together as we transform the promise of the advisory opinion into lasting action for our people, our Pacific, and future generations. And until we meet again, we thank you, stay safe, and have a wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're joining from. We will be sending out a summary of today's webinar, including responses to those questions that we missed. And we thank you all for joining us. Have a blessed rest of the day.